U.S. airstrikes hit Syria and Iraq. 5 sites targeted, all belonging to an Iranian-backed militia. That group blamed for attacks on Iraqi bases housing American forces. 200 people freed in a controversial prisoner swap between pro-Russia separatists and Ukraine. Among them, 5 riot policemen who were charged with killing democracy protesters 5 years ago. And wildfires rage on in Australia, so hot they're creating their own weather systems. More mass evacuations underway as scorching temperatures and high winds fan the flames. Hello, everyone. I'm Jeannie Godula in Paris. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First, the U.S. says it has successfully hit Iran-backed militia sites in Syria and Iraq. Washington's blaming that militia for Friday's rocket attack on a military base in Iraq that killed an American contractor and wounded 4 U.S. service members. The U.S. says it will take further action against the Iranian-backed groups if necessary. Emerald Maxwell explains.
The U.S. says some 24 fighters from the Kataib Hezbollah group were killed in the strikes on the militia's group headquarters near Iraq's western Qaim district on the border with Syria. They were a response to the group's rocket attack on an Iraqi military base near Kirkuk on Friday that killed a U.S. contractor and wounded several American and Iraqi troops.
What we did was take a decisive response that makes clear what President Trump has said for months and months and months, which is that we will not stand for the Islamic Republic of Iran to take actions that put American men and women in jeopardy.
The U.S. says Kataib Hezbollah receives aid and support from Iran that it uses to attack its forces. Some 5,000 U.S. troops are deployed in Iraq to fight the Islamic State group, but the U.S. increasingly considers Iran-backed militias a more significant threat. Iraq is close to both the U.S. and Iran and has increasingly been caught in the middle of their growing tensions. Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi made no public comment on Friday's militia attack, but did condemn the U.S.'s retaliatory strike, calling it a dangerous escalation that threatens the security of Iraq and the region.
We'll focus now on Sunday's prisoner swap between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian government forces. At least 200 detainees were bused to the exchange point in the breakaway Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Fighting broke out there 5 years ago, leading to the loss of more than 13,000 lives. Here's more from the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky.
The main thing is that the people are home. We did what we said before the New Year. They will celebrate New Year with their families, at home, with parents or children. It is great. I am happy. I am sure they are too.
That prisoner swap should help build confidence between the two sides now wrangling over a peace deal, but the swap was not without controversy. 5 of the former detainees are riot policemen charged with killing pro-democracy protesters 5 years ago. Our Kiev correspondent Gulliver Cragg explains.
The controversy surrounds these 5 officers of the then riot police in 2014 who were accused of killing 48 protesters on Maidan Square in Kiev, or just on Institute Street coming up from Maidan Square, and of injuring dozens of others. And they are just the 5 who Ukrainian justice system had managed to detain. At least 26 others were wanted, and they were suspected of having fled to either Crimea or to Russia, and Russia was refusing to extradite them and to cooperate with Ukrainian justice in any way. So this decision is, first of all, of course, the end of any hope for justice for the families of the victims, those who were killed during those Maidan protests. But it is also a real attack on the credibility of the Ukrainian justice system. And a lot of people here in Ukraine think that this is being done very deliberately, that this is a tactic by Vladimir Putin to undermine the idea that there can be due process in Ukraine and that justice could be found. Because these men, they're not Russian. They had nothing to do with the annexation of Crimea or the conflict in Donbas. They're Ukrainian citizens accused of crimes committed in Ukraine that Russia, through the so-called separatists that it controls in Donbas and Lugansk, has determined that Ukraine should free in order to get these other prisoners held in Donetsk and Lugansk freed. And so for a lot of Ukrainians, it's something that is a betrayal of the values that those people died for on Maidan, because people were fighting for there to be a proper rule of law in Ukraine, for there to be a fight against corruption, and for there to be real independence from Russia. So there are a lot of people in Ukraine who feel betrayed. On the other hand, there is a very, very big plus side to this story, which is that 76 people who had been detained, some of them for years, some of them in very, very bad conditions, most of them innocent, most of them simply having expressed their support for Ukraine, which was officially the country that they lived in when they lived in Donetsk and Lugansk at the time when those areas were being taken over by the separatists that Russia controls. They're now home with their families, and they'll be spending New Year with their families, which is the biggest annual festival in Ukraine. So as the president was saying, it's a very emotional moment for the country, and it's clearly a decision that the government decided was worth paying the price for.
That's France 24's Gulliver Cragg in Kiev. Wildfires continue to rage on in Australia. So hot, they're creating their own weather systems. More mass evacuations are underway as scorching temperatures and high winds fan the flames. Tens of thousands of visitors and residents in the southeastern state of Victoria were told to leave immediately to run from the threat of bushfires.
It's hot and windy and there's a lot of smoke about and a lot of fires still going, so I'm best off camping down here until it's all over, I think.
We decided last night to leave Nungurna at family farm, leave there because it takes so long to get the 30 of us anywhere at once, and evacuated here so that we were all safe for the day and see how it all pans out, I guess.
It's a full-on battle up here at the moment, and today will be the big day. If we get out of today, well, it'll be good, but we've got to get through today yet. That'll be the big tester.
The fires have been raging on for 4 months now, with many volunteer firefighters stepping in to help. The Australian government has now decided to thank them for their time by paying them. Simon Harding reports.
Volunteer firemen tackling Australia's blazes for the last 4 months. Night and day, on their days off, and even during the holiday period. The Australian government has decided to pay these volunteers €190 a day, with a maximum threshold of €5,500. Welcome news for many of them.
That's good, that makes us feel valued. So, yeah, you really do feel like you want to be helping, and you really do feel like you're obliged to do that. So, like, for me, it means I use my annual leave.
It's tough. And the payment is just a recognition of what we're doing. It doesn't compensate us for what we're losing, but it's recognition.
90% of all Australian firemen are volunteers. Prior to these blazes, they received no compensation for their time, but in light of the recent fires and the efforts demanded of them, authorities decided to change that.
It is necessary to ensure that we can provide this safety net for income loss, to ensure that he is in a position to continue to call out this volunteer force.
This financial aid has for now only been made available for volunteers in the state of New South Wales, which has been the worst affected by the fires. Since September, 10 people have died and over 3 million acres have been ravaged.
The ongoing fires have forced the cancellation of New Year's Eve fireworks in Perth and other cities across Australia. Sydney, however, will still set off its iconic fireworks show Tuesday night, despite growing pressure from locals to cancel the event and use the money to help fight the fires. Well, here in France, New Year's Eve is usually one of the biggest nights of the year for restaurants. But with the nationwide strike against pension reform now in its 4th week, businesses are worried.
Yet again, the restaurant is near empty. The sad reality for this Parisian restaurateur over the past month. With 50 bookings, the forecast for New Year's Eve looks more promising, but not when you compare to last year's 110.
We're still hoping for some drop-ins on the night and a few more calls between now and Tuesday afternoon. In the best scenario, we could get 70 to 80 covers, but that's a real drop from previous years.
Normally, the restaurant makes 1% of its annual turnover on New Year's Eve.
We're obviously really feeling the pinch. We're facing a situation we have no control over. Very few people are blockading France, but all our employees, all businesses are suffering because of it. It's difficult to manage.
He's not alone. Hotels saw a drop in bookings of 30% in December. Restaurants a 40% drop. This industry representative says that in Paris, that translates to a loss of at least 200 to 300 million euros.
There's a risk that businesses will have to liquidate and close. But before that, they'll start with laying people off, breaking contracts.
To make the most of a bad situation, some businesses are adapting. This hotel has lost 75,000 euros since the start of the strike, so its owner has slashed prices for New Year's Eve.
Normally, a room is 135 euro, but at the moment, we rent it for about 70 or 80, anything to keep it from being empty.
Its restaurant, on the other hand, has actually picked up more reservations than usual from people stranded in the capital for the holidays.
The United States was hit with a new church shooting Sunday. A gunman opened fire during a live-streamed service at West Freeway Church of Christ in Texas. He killed 2 people before he was shot dead himself by other gun-bearing worshippers in church. Kemi Danilek has the details.
A place of worship turned into a place of terror in Texas on Sunday as a gunman walked into this church and opened fire on parishioners mid-service before armed churchgoers retaliated.
It's tragic and it's a terrible situation, especially during the holiday season. I would like to point out that we have a couple of heroic parishioners who stopped short of just anything that you could even imagine and saved countless lives, and our hearts are going out to them and their families as well.
The church service was being live streamed when the attack happened. The video was swiftly made private, but has since been leaked. Parishioners say they did not know the shooter, and the attack appears to be random. Around 40,000 people were killed by firearms in 2017 in the US. And tightening gun control laws remains a controversial issue.
Vote counting's underway in Guinea-Bissau. 2 former prime ministers faced off in the presidential runoff there after the current incumbent president failed to make it to the second round. Laurent Berstaker reports.
A runoff that could mark a turning point for Guinea-Bissau. Many voters who headed to the polls on Sunday hoped the election would bring long-awaited stability to the West African nation, whose history has been fraught with military coups and political turmoil.
I want peace for the country, and I hope that the loser will accept the results.
Yet immediately after casting his ballot and urging all Guineans to come out and vote, opposition candidate Umaro Embalo accused the Electoral Commission of bias and fraud.
Before the vote, the president of the commission said, "Listen, we must do everything we can to prevent Embalo from winning. This is very serious."
Embalo's rival, ruling party candidate Domingos Pereira, whose 40% score in the first round wasn't enough to avoid a runoff, issued a message of unity after casting his ballot on Sunday.
I hope this result will represent the will of the Ghanaian people and that it will allow us to build national harmony so that our country can grow once more.
Despite accusations of fraud, the National Electoral Commission said the turnout was healthy and that voting had generally unfolded in a peaceful atmosphere. Observers of the West African bloc ECOWAS also noted no major incidents and expressed cautious optimism that the military would not interfere in the political process. The election results are not expected until next week.
You're watching France 24. There's a lot more to come, and I'll be back here in the newsroom in 15 minutes with more of your world news.